I don't know if we even need a microphone tonight. Anyway, most of you know me. I am Adele West Fisher. I am the coordinator of library services here at the Athenaeum. And we are very pleased to have Mr. Leffel here, Duane, here tonight. I want to just take a couple moments to make you aware of a few things that are happening here in the next few weeks. For those of you young at heart, we are having a jack-o'-lantern contest, kids through adults, so you adults do not have to be shy. People can bring in their pumpkins between October 29th through the 31st. We have various prize levels and age groups, and there will be prizes. Also, what has started here at the Athenaeum is the Vermont Humanities Council First Wednesday series has started. We've already had one, and we're going to be having another one Wednesday, November 6th at 7 o'clock. Bob did get booklets, so if you would like a booklet on the First Wednesday series, I do have some on that back bookcase, as well as some downstairs on a table, if you're interested in that. And then, of course, if you want to know more information about all the wonderful things that are going on here at the Athenaeum, if you would go to www.stjathenaeum.org, and there'll be kids events, adult events, and all our services that we have available to our community. Moving on to our event for tonight, Kicking Gas and Taking Charge. Our speaker tonight is Duane Leffel. He is a writer, a forward-thinking, environment-conscious individual. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me.
And in my opinion, he's a real adventurer. And when you hear some of what he has to say tonight, you might think, yeah, he really is. I don't know if I could take off in an electric car and hope to get very far, so I applaud this wonderful effort. He is the former executive for Nissan North America and has over 30 years of sales and marketing expertise in the automotive and construction industries. And when I read a little bit on the back of his book, I thought, oh, this guy has got to come, because it says, and this is just a vowel sentence, in 2013, 8 strangers from around the world decided to try to make a sustainability difference by setting 4 Guinness World Records in all electric vehicles, a car, a motorcycle, a scooter, and a bicycle. And I thought, oh, we have got to invite him. So I hope, like me, you are really looking forward to hearing what Duane has to say. So I would like to ask you to please join me in welcoming Duane Leffel. Okay, Duane, take it away.
Thank you, Adele. I'll turn this thing on. I don't know if we really need it, but well, not if we do it that way. Oh, this didn't turn off. No, yeah, it did. Well, anyway, if we don't need it, I won't use it. So we'll...
Oh, you do need the mic, so he can hear. Yeah.
Okay. We will turn it on. So yeah, thank you very much for having me tonight. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun along the way and hearing the story. I'm going to start you out with a bit of trivia, though. Something none of you here know, and probably not too many people do know, but Adele mentioned jack-o'-lanterns, and actually, you may remember a few years ago in Keene, you guys had a big, it was in Keene, New Hampshire, they had the annual challenge for jack-o'-lanterns, number of lit jack-o'-lanterns.
Yeah.
And back in, I think it was about 5 years ago, they set the Guinness World Record for the number of lit jack-o'-lanterns. 31,000 lit jack-o'-lanterns. Well, I was there. One of my jack-o'-lanterns was in there, and I was physically there. So it was kind of a unique event. If you've never been, I encourage you all to go. It's kind of a fun time. So Adele mentioned my background. My background is corporate. I was with Caterpillar for a few years while I went to college and when I got out. And then after that, I moved on to Nissan, and I was with them for 28 years. Various different sales and marketing activities, started in parts and then moving on to vehicles and actually vehicle pricing. And if you have a Nissan vehicle, I might have priced it. But anyway, I want to start out with just asking a little bit about you folks, though. How many of you here have electric vehicles? We have one. Good. Two?
It's a hybrid, sorry.
Okay, well, that's all right. We'll count that.
Okay.
So hybrids okay, so we got three, actually. Okay, how many of you are thinking about a hybrid or an electric? Okay, very good. Well, I think you'll find this interesting. There's a big push right now, I understand, in your state to try to get more electric vehicles on the road. Kind of natural. A lot of people have some concerns about that, and rightfully so. And I think once you get done, you'll have a little bit better perspective to be able to make a decision about whether it's right for you or not. But bottom line is, I proved that we could go across the country in an electric car, and if I can do it, I think anybody can do it. Because my background was not certainly in electric cars. And what I learned, though, from the experience was what enabled me to to have a Guinness World Record hanging on my wall, and not too many people have one of those, so it's kind of nice. So what we'll talk about tonight is about my trip, a lot of interesting points to make along the way on that, and at the end we'll talk a little bit about sustainability, which is kind of the bigger picture. I will tell you that when I started this trip across the country, I didn't know exactly what sustainability meant. I don't think most people do. And when I got back and thought about it, decided to write a book about it, one of the things I did was do more research about sustainability. And I think having looked at it objectively, I actually think that it's something everybody should have some engagement in one way or another. And particularly the younger generation. Part of what I'm doing up here this week is donating some books to the state libraries, because we need to get to the younger generation. They can certainly make a difference in our future. So that's kind of my hope for how the books will be used. So with that being said, I'm going to start and go through this little presentation and talk along the way. So this is the cover of the book. Well, we thought we'd make this work, and now all of a sudden it doesn't want to. I might have to do this the old-fashioned way. Well, we've suddenly locked up. Adele, I may need some help here. Maybe I need to go back in, because it was working before, and I don't know why it's not working now. Sorry, folks.
Where's your little, just pull it out and put it back in, maybe.
This one?
Yeah. No?
No. And my down arrow doesn't work either. So I can exit it and go back in.
Yeah, let's do that.
Accept that. There. All right. Well, we'll go back to it. Let's see. I don't know why it's not. Let's see if it works now. Look at that. We had this perfect going. Sorry, I don't know what's...
Reboot it.
Yeah, I think I'll have to...
And we have a backup computer.
Well, I don't understand. There it went. I don't know why. All right, hopefully this will work too. Okay, so the name of this cross-country tour was called the Ride the Future Tour. And that was because our whole intent was to try to make people more aware of electric vehicles. And our belief, the group that was there, was that electric vehicles were viable in 2013 already and could be used in lieu of carbon emissions engines, what they call ICE engines or gasoline engines. So that was what our tour name was. Sustainability was the topic that came up along the way, and we'll talk about that, like I said, why you should care about it. So this was the group of folks that took off on this tour. There were 11 individuals that quite honestly didn't know each other. The only person that they knew was Susan Jones. You'll see her in the middle there, because she was the one that coordinated all. She actually funded this whole trip, believe it or not. And that was the only person everybody knew. So when we met in Charleston, South Carolina, all of these folks didn't know each other. So the first thing we had to do was get to know each other, which is a very odd situation. Going left to right, Sean was our truck driver. He was a support vehicle, which we had to have for all of our stuff. Then you have George. He was a sound man. He actually does sound for Shaquille O'Neal's commercials, by the way. Two folks on the far right, Jonathan and Evan, those are the other two folks of the documentary crew. There was a documentary crew with us that filmed everything we did. So there's actually hundreds of hours of film of this whole trip that someday, my hope was with the book somehow that we could get enough attention that this thing becomes an actual film for Netflix or somebody. Kyle there was with the electric bike company. He wasn't really part of the group, to be honest, but he was there for this picture. Dominique was Susan's daughter, and she was along as support, and she was, she's a singer now. She was trying to, she did some entertainment along the way. Rachel down there at the bottom, her whole focus was on trying to educate kids. We were hoping to have all kinds of events that we could draw kids to and give them education about sustainability topics. Ben was an electric motorcycle rider from New Jersey. Stuart over there in the right center was a lobbyist, political lobbyist in Washington, D.C., trying to get new regulations on carbon emissions. And so we wanted to go to have different meetings along the way that he could speak at. Susan, I talked about, she lives in Thailand now. She lived there at the time as well and went to Vietnam to write books as another part of her life, but she was born here in the U.S. Ben Hopkins rode the electric bike across the country. So this was a group of folks, like I said, that just met and tried to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this happen? And this is not going to work. Oh, because I turned it off. There we go. So we started over at the far right in Charleston, South Carolina, and took a southern route across the United States. Total of 44 cities. It was mapped out at 3,700 miles. It actually became 4,400 miles when it was all said and done. But we took a southern route to avoid some of the mountain areas and such, got to LA, and then went up to San Francisco. But you can see the different cities along the way. Those are the only places where, there were some public chargers and that, but these were just major cities along the way that we went through. What are our objectives? They were to bring attention about electric vehicles. We talked about this, talked about the fact that we had an electric car, we had an electric motorcycle, we had an electric scooter, we had an electric bike. How did this get started? By pure happenstance. I went to a state park one day to do some hiking. I had a big Goldwyn motorcycle, if you know what that is, biggest bike that Honda makes. And I rode up to the park and was going to do some hiking. I get off my bike and I'm right beside this little tiny scooter. And lo and behold, the owner comes over, and I kind of made fun of her little scooter compared to my big motorcycle. Well, she proceeded to tell me this wasn't just a scooter, it was an all-electric scooter, and that this was her only mode of transportation to go all the way around the city, which I knew where she was at. I know how she had to get there, and I thought that was pretty impressive. She used that as her only way to get around the city. So we struck up a conversation, Susan and I did, and we later went to dinner and became friends. Her whole thing was she had gotten the rights to import and distribute these electric scooters from China throughout the United States. She wanted a way to promote them. So she was talking to me as a marketing guy, saying, hey, how do we do this? Well, I came up with the idea of trying to set a Guinness World Record, going across the country and doing this on a scooter. You can imagine it might be a little hairy at times. I said, you might get blown off the road. She said, that's okay, I'm up for it. So she ran away with this thing. We tried to get Nissan involved. The Nissan was kind of standoffish on it. And we later approached them again, which I'll talk about. But we had a time to reflect because she went back to Thailand. And so I didn't talk to her for about 4 or 5 months. And meanwhile, I was at the point where I could potentially retire. And I get this call, says, hey, I'm going to do this trip. Do you want to be involved? And I said, well, what's going on? She said, well, she has a bike rider, she has a scooter rider, and she has a motorcycle rider, and she wanted an electric car in there, and she knew I was the guy for the electric car. Because with Nissan, that's one of our products. So bottom line is I decided to do it. And so that's how it all got started, just by happenstance of a meeting. And going on to our rest of our objectives here, we wanted to get people to try to think about getting away from foreign oil and to reduce the emissions in the air.
Every time you move your pointer.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to turn it off. I don't know why it does it. So, and the objective was also to set 4 Guinness World Records, 1 for each type of vehicle. And our record would be for the longest distance driven in an all-electric vehicle. This was my car. You can see we put the pattern of, or the map of our trip across the side. And so I guess at this point, I'd like to ask, it was in the flyer, I think, how many of you would take off on a trip across the U.S. not knowing where there were any gas stations? Well, that's exactly what it was like in 2013 for me, because I literally didn't know where I was going to get power. Yeah. And the key to this whole trip, as we'll talk about, was finding power. And I liken it to this commercial. I found this ad somewhere, about trying to find gas on the moon. But to give you some perspective, if you look up at the upper right, the number of gas stations in the U.S. in 2013 was 121,500. The number of EV charging stations nationwide was only 5,400. So somewhere in there, I had to find ways to use them as best I could. And on top of that, if you look at a gas car that gets, 25 miles per gallon with a tank size of 15 gallons, you can get 375, 400 miles on a tank of gas. Well, my charged up Leaf, if I was lucky, I could get 90. So that puts it in perspective of how many times I would have to stop compared to how many somebody was driving driving a gas car would take. So there were big challenges up front, and we'll talk about some of the differences of why it made it, why I got a Guinness record, and it had to do a lot with planning, quite honestly. So I talked about one of the big things on any electric car is you got to know where you're going to get power. It forces you, if you own an electric car, it forces you to have to plan. And if you're using it for commuting, that actually isn't too difficult. You probably know where the chargers are. You probably, you charge them up at night. If it's a hybrid, you can plug it in if you need to. But if you're traveling distances, you got to know where those power sources are. And 220 volts is everywhere. It comes into your house. But having access to it, being able to plug into it's a whole different story. And so that was one of the big challenges for us. Now, it varied by type of vehicle, though. So this is where things start to get complex. The motorcycle and the car basically run off a 220-volt charging. But the scooters had a normal car battery, 12-volt car battery, and they could actually do a full 100 miles in a day with 2 batteries, typically. The bicycles, on the other hand, you can see Rachel here was actually riding this day, and she's changing out a battery here on the left. In their case, they would only last for roughly an hour, so they needed at least 4 to 5 batteries a day. So they had to charge them up every night. And then, so because I was the only transportation vehicle, I became the support vehicle basically for the bike. So I saw an awful lot of the United States at 20 miles an hour, because that's all of the speed that the bike could do. So now you start to understand some of the complexities. You got a bike that can only do 15 to 20 miles per hour, but it has to have 4 to 5 batteries per day. You got scooters that can do 35 to 40 miles per hour, but need 2 batteries a day. You got a motorcycle and a car that, they can do 60, 70 mile an hour, but they can't do that on a regular basis depending on the topography. and other considerations, but they require 220 volts, and they can usually only go, about 80 to 100 miles, depending on, like I say, the topography and how fast they were going, whether they're running air conditioners or things like that. So that's the things we immediately ran into the first day out. And in fact, not only did we have a rainstorm where everybody got soaked except for me because I was in the car, but everybody met up at this one restaurant so we could recollect ourselves. But the people that started out with the scooters and the bike failed to charge the batteries the night before. So we arrived at this restaurant and filled every single one of their outlets with battery chargers to charge up batteries for the rest of the day. So that was day one. Also, at the same time, we went to the Nissan dealership so that the car and the motorcycle could charge up, because they have 220 volt outlets, as you probably are, chargers. The problem there was we needed two, and there was only one. So we couldn't charge together. And to give you some perspective, if I have to charge up the Nissan Leaf, or the 2013 model, and it was fairly well depleted in power, it took me 3 to 4 hours to charge up. So I just sat there, wherever I was at, tried to get a bite to eat or whatever I was doing. Same way with the motorcycle. So you can see if I'm trading off with him, I'm actually not going to charge any more than I have to make it to where I know I need to go, because I got to give him time to charge. So things became very complex very rapidly. Plus we got stopped by the police the first day for blocking traffic. All right, so power. This is just some examples for me for the car. Charging stations around the country. The first one's in Calhoun, Georgia. Right of that is Albuquerque, New Mexico. This was a Santa Monica pier, or Santa Monica, beach in California. And this was Union in South Carolina. And each one of those things, we found them along the way, but sometimes they weren't convenient. The place in Union was like 30 miles out of my way. But I had to go there because that was the only public charger between Charleston and Greenville. So I had to go there to get recharged for the day. So the key for me was knowing where these were, and I planned them out ahead of time. We literally, Susan and I mapped every single mile from Charleston, South Carolina to San Francisco of the route we were going to take. We couldn't take the major interstates or freeways because the bike could only do 15 to 20 mile an hour. We took all back roads. So for me, I took then and overlaid on top of that route every single public charger all the way along the route. So I knew where they were. I was able to charge at public chargers from Charleston to Memphis. But after Memphis, there's a sea of nothingness for public chargers all the way to California. So I had to figure out, okay, how do I fill in those gaps? Well, just before we left, the charging company for the Nissan Leaf gave me 2 extra cords for the car. I had to learn how to charge up the car and how to do the blink system, which is one of the systems for charging up cars and paying with a little card and that. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was a novice at this whole thing. But I learned it. And one of the things they did was they gave me 2 extra charge cords for 220 volt. Well, I felt that was nice, except I knew one end fit in the car, but I didn't know what the other end fit. They were just a plug. And if you go out, I looked at this little schematic that they have out there, it's in my book, of the different types of outlets for 220 volt power. There's got to be 40 different types of plugs that you can have for 220 volt power. So it's like, okay, well, I don't know what this thing fits, but I'll take it along. And just before I left Nashville, somebody told me that RV parks use 220 volt power because RVs, the big RVs, have them for their big air conditioners on the big motorhomes. So I went out to the north side of Nashville and went to the RV park, and I took out those 2 cords, and I just wanted to see if they'd plug in. Well, sure enough, one of them did. So that was enlightenment number 1, because now I knew I could overlay not only the public chargers, but all the RV parks along our route. And so I did that all the way across the country. But I still had holes. There were still places that I didn't know where I was going to get power. One of those places, and I'll just tell you the story now, is Brinkley, Arkansas. Once we got to Memphis, the next stop was Brinkley, Arkansas. I did not know where I was going to get power at Brinkley, Arkansas. We couldn't go any further than that for the day, and there was no power for 220 volt that I knew about. There was certainly no public chargers, and there was no RV park. So what do? Well, we called up the hotel guy and said, hey, we need 220 volt power. He says, okay, I'll get it for you. We said, okay. And we pulled into the hotel that night, and we check in and everything. We said, okay, where can we get 220 volt power to charge up the car? He says, take the car over there to your hotel room and unplug the air conditioner. Okay, so we did that and drove my car over there. I took out the second cord that I had and tried it, and lo and behold, it fit. And interesting fact, it turns out that every single hotel in the U.S. that has an air conditioner in the room uses the exact same 220 volt outlet. And at that point, the light went on. I had a way to get all the way to the West Coast. So with the exception of one or two places, I knew I had power now all along the way. And that was the enlightenment, but I didn't know that until I was in the middle of Brinkley, Arkansas. So a little bit of fun fact. So we'll talk about the other hole that I had that was interesting. One of the other power sources, we've stopped a lot at Nissan dealerships because all Nissan dealerships, for the most part, have 220 volt chargers that are free to their consumers or to their customers and that. And so we use them quite a bit along the way.
Did you do our public relation events with the Nissan dealerships that you're coming through?
In a couple of places, yeah, but in general, this gets back to trying to get Nissan on board. We approached them a couple different times. Nissan was reluctant to get on board. And the whole reason was because they were concerned that people would take their Nissan Leaf, try and drive it across the country, run out of power, and then be pissed off at the car. Yeah. And so it was the marketing message they were concerned about. I mean, I understand it, but there's also a side, okay, well, what time, when do you start talking about the long term of what the capabilities of the car may be? Because I did reapproach them even after I had the Guinness World Record in hand, and they still didn't buy in, which is pretty disappointing, to be honest, but it is what it is. So we didn't. They never got engaged with the Nissan dealers. I even recently had some discussion with them about trying to do something with the books, after the fact, and they cited cost this time. So it's a bit of frustration for me, especially since I worked there. But anyway, I'm not going to go through all of this. I think we've talked about all these points here. This was the portable charger that I had along, and here you can see it being used at one of the RV parks. And here you can see it being used in some of the RV parks. And the upper left one was in a campground in the middle of nowhere in a state park that we missed the main parking area, I guess, main campground area, I guess. But anyway, we didn't even know this thing worked until we plugged it in. Sure enough, it did. But various different campgrounds along the way. The far right one, well, we'll come back to that. Here's the hotel challenges. You can see many times we ran them through the windows. This one here cost me $40 because I bent the screen. Other times I just had to leave the door open, one time all night. Just because it's the only way we could in. The windows were fixed, you couldn't open them or anything. So, but all I knew was 220 volt power. That's what I needed, and that's what we did. Other places, washrooms, this was a washer and dry area in the left in Baker, California. Vending machines. This one here is a little bit of a side story. This was at an ice machine at a huge truck stop on the border between New Mexico and Arizona. And we went in there, we were real nice place. He even had a small museum for automotive things and that. We sat there to have a bite to eat. And I had asked the one guy who was the manager there if I could plug in. He said, sure, no problem. So I pulled my car up onto the back patio and her back dock and plugged in. About 10 or 15 minutes later, this guy came up and he was red in the face. He was so pissed off at me because I had plugged into his ice machine. He was the owner, and he was not happy with his employee at all, and he made me move my car because he didn't want anybody using his outlet there for it. So, I won't give him any applause or negatives. I mean, I don't really know what his motives were. They actually had an electric charging station there. Maybe that was it, I don't know. But I didn't know that at the time when we pulled in. But anyway, that was a side story there. He was not a happy camper. Far right, when there actually was a casino on the California and Nevada border, we needed power to be able to get to Baker, California. And in this case, we had to climb on top of the car, plug into the outlet, which was in the ceiling. So, again, wherever you could find power, that's what you had to do. Some of the other challenges, weather was a big one. The rain was a big challenge for the other riders, not so much for me. I like these two pictures because this is like a before and an after. And they're looking back wondering why I'm not getting out of the car. And I just took the picture from inside the car, and I thought that was appropriate because that was one of the advantages of being in the car. I didn't have to get wet, but they got wet. And in fact, I think we had a little sleet that day too, so. But it happens, you just deal with it. Heat. We had in Oklahoma, I know it was like 105 the day we were there. Baker, California, we pulled into the world's largest thermometer. It was 108 that day. And, many places along the way where, we had high temperatures in the deserts and such. We were in July and August. That wouldn't have been my choice, but that's what we had. So, again, we just had to deal with it. Fog down here, interestingly enough, in San Francisco. We were taking our last ride up to the Golden Gate Bridge and into Google headquarters to our finish line. And we decided to take a road we thought would be not only more scenic, but also a little bit better road than going through all the city traffic. Well, we got up there on this ridge and we ran into all this fog, and it was dense fog and it was cold. It was so cold that all of the riders were freezing their butts off. We had to go back down into the city and go on up to the Golden Gate Bridge and finish our ride that way. Darkness on the far right. We had a couple places where we were riding in the dark, and it was dangerous in some cases. One case, we were in a state park in Tennessee. We drove for like an hour in pure darkness, couldn't see anything. There was nothing around. We had to make a turn, told us we had to make a turn to go to the campground. We did. It turns out it went like 270 degrees. We went another hour back down before we finally found the campground. Pitch dark. So it was some challenging times. The terrain along the way, a lot of mountains we had to climb along the way. 18-wheelers for the scooters and that. I mean, you had to worry about being blown off. There weren't that many times when we were on the interstate, but there were times you had no choice. And so you have to deal with it and just make sure that you're as safe as you can possibly be. I will tell you one quick story, just as an aside. We're talking about safety. Memphis, Tennessee, when we got there, we had to cross over the Mississippi River. Well, there's only two ways to cross the Mississippi River out of Memphis. Both of them are interstates. So we knew it was a challenge for us to get across because, those bridges are 3 and 4 miles long. So we planned ahead of time to all go as a group when there was a break in traffic, and we would go as fast as we could. Bike could only do 20 mile an hour, and get across as fast as we could. Well, as we did that, the first thing the documentary crew did is they pulled out to the left so they could film everything. I'm in the lead, leading everybody away, ahead of the group, and I'm expecting shortly after we get on there that there's going to be all these mass, car horns, people, giving us the, number one, et cetera, and just being totally pissed off because we're doing 20 mile an hour. They're coming up on us at 60, 70 mile an hour. We go across the bridge and there's none of this noise, and we're wondering, what the heck's going on? So I turned back and looked back behind us, and lo and behold, there's two 18-wheelers who had pulled up behind us, and they seen what was happening, and they blocked the traffic for us all the way across that bridge. And thank God they did, because it was a scary deal to be going 20 mile an hour and everybody else was doing 70. But these guys, and we went over, we gave them a hearty wave and thank you type of thing, but they blocked the traffic for us, which was very nice of them to do. Just one little story. Organization and coordination is another one of the main issues. You can see when we started out, everybody just threw their stuff in the back of the truck. You couldn't find anything. Couldn't find anything. So the documentary crew went out to Home Depot, bought a bunch of shelving and built shelves for us and put it in there, so we got some organization to it. But again, coordinating our routes and everything. The far right corner down there was actually we were headed up to Big Sur. Another place where we were doing 20 mile an hour, it was a very gradual climb all the way up to Big Sur, and cars were coming by us, honking at us, going right very close to us, 60, 70 mile an hour. And there's nothing you can do other than try to minimize the times that happens. We did have a couple times where people did fall, get injured. Fortunately, nothing major. This case, Rachel had slipped on the edge. She was riding the bike and slipped on the edge on some gravel and laid it out, scraped herself up. We didn't have any water, so I pulled out my super soaker, and that's how we cleaned her wound. Another one of the challenges, unexpected repairs. Bicycles all the time are having flat tires. They'd run over stuff, they'd have to do it. Sometimes they had problems with the spokes. That's why in the center picture there, they actually had more than one bike down because they were having to change wheels because of the spokes in them that they were having problems with. I even had a flat tire in Laguna Hills, California on the beach. Unfortunately, America's Tire fixed it for me for nothing. So anyway, but that's just part of, again, some of the things you deal with. Some other things, roads, water crossing the roads. Story in the upper right-hand corner is kind of an interesting one. When you get out into Arizona and New Mexico, GPS suddenly Google Maps doesn't work so well. And in fact, there were times when we'd take a road and it wouldn't show, it would show on Google Maps one way, but the actuality was something else. In this case, I drove like 8 miles with the bike rider down this road alongside the highway, and all of a sudden there was a fence and the road ended. So I had to turn around and go back 8 miles to get back onto the freeway and go come back down and meet Ben. Meanwhile, we threw his bike over the fence, he climbed over the fence and took off alongside the freeway. So just one of those, again, another one of those things you just comes along. I swear this is the straightest road in the United States. I could have fell asleep and it would still woke up in the middle of that road in New Mexico. In the far right-hand corner, this is an interesting tale of the little old lady. We'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. All right, so I'm not going to go through all the different states and the stories. Obviously, there's stories in all of them, but I'll just whip through some pictures from the different states. This was where we started in South Carolina. You can see that we were riding in darkness in the far lower corner there. Interesting here in Georgia, Terrapin Brewery, they invited us to meet their patrons. They invited their patrons like every Saturday to come out for music, and to drink beer and just have a general party, and they do that every week. They invited us to come out there and give a short talk and interlace with their patrons, which was kind of nice. The group, or the picture in the upper right is South Face. They are very focused on sustainability, energy design. I point that out because when I started this, I knew nothing about sustainability. And Susan was very much involved in it. She believes in changing the world, and so along the way, she designed these places for us to stop. So we toured the South Face facility in Atlanta. And it's very interesting because what they do is they design buildings to be energy efficient. And it's used in a lot of ways to, from everything from the plants to just the type of, the way the buildings are designed to be energy efficient. And they make a lot of money by doing that. But it's very interesting to hear them talk. kind of a forefront of sustainability design for industry. McMinnville, Tennessee. All of these pictures are from McMinnville. They went all out. You talked about having different places to have events with folks. McMinnville was one of the highlights of our trip, quite honestly. Small city, but they did everything from putting us on their marquee at their theater to having us do a public radio interview. This was a consumer electric vehicle, and they had a contest there for singing and different things for a whole evening with the people of the town. Rachel started this thing with the kids and doing something for putting their hands on it and relating to sustainability topics. Before we got there, we actually got a police escort into town, which was kind of cool. But there was a state park just outside of McMinnville, and they actually have a cavern underground, and they do bluegrass concerts out of there. Now, if you've ever heard of it, it's called Bluegrass Underground, but they actually take their performers down into the cavern in a Nissan Leaf. So what they invited me to do, and as well as the rest of our group, was to take all of our electric vehicles, which don't emit, gas emissions and such, to come down into the cavern with them. And I drove into the cavern. First of all, I had about that much space on either side of my mirrors to get in. Literally, that was the opening of the cavern to get in. And then drove in a circular pattern all the way down to the cavern. And here you can see this is us with our vehicles down in the cavern where they do their performances, like I say, with major bluegrass entertainers. So, kind of an interesting little event for that day. Another sustainability topic, Heifer International. If any of you know what Heifer is, what they're all about, their sustainability element is you buy a goat, they give it to some third world country in town, and that person, whoever receives it, has to take the first offspring and give that to a neighbor. And they replicate that down the line. So that's one of their major focuses for sustainability topics. So Ellen DeGeneres is actually one of the major, I think, contributors with them. But we did a lot of camping and such in Arkansas. Oklahoma, the only thing I'll talk about Oklahoma, two things. This is where we started Route 66. We actually picked up Route 66 in Oklahoma City and took it all the way to Santa Monica, more or less. And then on the right, remember water hole number 2, that was on the Texas-New Mexico border, and Oklahoma-Texas border, excuse me. And remember the dog pack, another story I'll come back to. Texas, some more of Route 66. New Mexico, some interesting stories along there. Arizona, another brewery here. We hooked it up there, by the way, to make it look like it was filling up, recharging my car from their vat of beer. Yeah, it was kind of fun. And then finally on into Nevada, Hoover Dam, crossing that. By the way, upper right-hand corner, that is a bicycle retail store that is not only fully energy efficient or not, and they don't require any energy, they actually sell energy off to other people. So just proof that businesses can be 100% energy efficient. So. And water efficient too, I didn't mention. And then finally into California, where we finished at Google headquarters. So that's the basic story of our trip. I'll move from here just into a little bit of talking about, well, first of all, what did we accomplish? Well, we did get a fair amount of publicity along the way. It wasn't nearly what we'd hoped, but we did get some, both radio, some paper, and things, some little bit of TV even, et cetera. We did talk to a lot of people that were interested. To be honest with you, there's a lot more people interested now. You guys are evidence of that, quite honestly. There's a lot more people interested in electric vehicles than there were in 2013. We were kind of pioneers in a lot of ways in that respect. And we talked to them, and a lot of people that were interested in trying to get away from gas and oil. And here you can see some of we were actually at a car show in the lower right-hand corner in California. So then, sustainability. I'm going to move into this because, like I said, I knew nothing about sustainability. I'm not going to talk in detail here, but what I wanted to convey from my book was I came in not because I didn't know anything about it. I tried to take a very objective look at it, because you get a lot of people are usually very passionate, one way or the other. And I tried to come in it very objectively. It's kind of my engineering background. And just to say, okay, well, what's it about? And first thing I did was I remembered, when I started this, I wanted to do something that my kids would remember and it would be good for them on the long haul. That the earth would be similar to what I enjoyed it as. And so that was part of my motivation for doing the trip. And what I found when I looked into the definition was I came up with my own, and that is basically that if we achieve sustainability, we'll be able to continue the earth supporting human life as we know it. If we don't do these things, quite honestly, there's limited resources and things are got to change. We're gonna have to move underground, or we're gonna have to make a lot of big changes that will dramatically impact how we live our life. Not necessarily us, but our kids and our kids' kids. So that's kind of the definition that I came away with. And from a very broad perspective, because if you get into this, it's very easy to get mired in the weeds. I'll make 2 quick points of why I believe everybody should be involved in sustainability. The first one is about population growth. And here what you see is a chart that shows that in 2000, roughly 15, there's roughly 7.4 billion people in the world. By the year 2100, that grows 50% up to about 11 billion people. That's a huge growth. Now the red line shows you that the rate of growth is going down, but the sheer volume is going up dramatically. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is energy usage. At the same time that's happening, energy usage is going up dramatically. Now how it breaks out is different. This is coal here. This is petroleum and oil. This is natural gas. What you see is coal is pretty flat. Maybe it's starting to come down a little bit at the end. It's going to continue to come down, despite what you may hear from the administration. There's some dynamics as to why that's going to continue to come down. And it has to do with the fact that there's alternatives now for renewable energies which are actually less costly than for building a coal-fired furnace. Then that didn't used to be the case. That is the case now. And so that'll continue to make growth. And China, even though they're a huge user and offender, if you want to call them that, for emissions and that, they've made a sustained effort right now. They are pushing big time into electric. Make no mistake about it. And if the United States doesn't do something, they will lead in this technology. There's no doubt. There's 2 electric bus companies in the United States right now. One of them is Chinese, BYD. So, and they're making a big initiative in cars as well. Maybe the emissions right now for a lot of Chinese cars won't fit what the Americans require for gas engines. But like I say, they're pushing on electric, and the emissions won't be the issue to keep it from coming out. Safety might be, but certainly not emissions. So that's going to be a major thing for the future. China is going to continue to make this come down here. Petroleum is going to continue to go down for the same reasons. Natural gas is actually growing some. That's because of fracking, new sources there. Some other things here about nuclear is pretty stagnant, but hydroelectric is growing, and the one that's at the top, other renewables, that's your solar energy, and that's your wind power. And that is growing, and it's going to grow much rapidly now because the costs have come down so dramatically. If you go out now and compare price-wise for solar panels, you'll find them dramatically less than what they were just 5 years ago. And so that's going to change a lot of dynamics for companies when they're building new factories and places to actually build with solar panels designed into them. So my point from this slide, though, is not only is the population growing dramatically, but also energy usage is going up dramatically. And that's because a lot of third world countries are growing in their usage. China is a good example. A lot more people, because they have more wealth, are going to be using cars. So usage of power is going to go up at the same time. So with those two factors, well, I'll come back. So those two factors are the major factors I see in considering sustainability. On the other hand, gas and oil take millions of years to form. We don't know how much gas and oil is in our earth. We're pulling it out by the barrels, hundreds of millions of barrels, on an ongoing basis. But we really don't know when it'll go away, when it'll just dry up. In fact, there was one of the gas companies put in their annual report that they predicted that the reserves were only good for about another 50 years. And I guess I got tremendous backlash because the oil companies so panicked. Like, what do you mean there's only worth 50 years left? And so there was a big backlash. I doubt that they put anything like that anymore in there. But the point is, we don't know how much longer all this oil and gas is going to last. So we need to find other alternatives, like the renewables or the solar and the electric, et cetera, to be able to offset, or I say oil, gas, hydroelectric, et cetera. This is an interesting slide, I believe. The U.S. is less than 5% of the U.S. global population, but we consume 18% of the global energy. Europe's very similar, 7% and 16%. China, because they have much bigger population with their usage, and again, not as much wealth within their middle class, et cetera, their population energy consumption is fairly even. But my point here is the U.S., because of its energy usage, should be taking the lead on this issue, and we're not. So I won't really go too much into this. It's just, well, there is one big point to make here. This is talking about landfills, first of all, right here. Landfill usage is pretty flat. What you're seeing happen, though, is there's a lot of landfills that are starting to close because they're full. The Dallas-Fort Worth landfill recently closed because they don't have room anymore. So we're putting a lot of stuff in there, but it's going to fill up at some point. The other thing, though, you got some area for composting. This is for energy recovery, but recycling is growing on a global basis, but the U.S. lags dramatically versus Europe. We only recycle about 1/3 of what we consume, and that's like double that in Europe. Much more concerted effort, much more focused effort in recycling. So we can do a lot better in that regard. And again, when we recycle, we use less energy. Sometimes 9 or 10 times less energy used if we recycle versus pulling it from the natural resources. This is just about greenhouse gas emissions. I think you know about that, so I won't go into that one. So my main takeaway is the Earth's oil and gas, it's a fixed commodity. There's only so much there. It took millions of years to form, and it's limited. And we're drawing it out by the hundreds of barrels, I'm sure millions of barrels daily. So we need to find alternatives. And with that, as far as I'm concerned, we should show leadership in that respect. And so that's my main message from what I learned about sustainability. And I came into it very objectively, but I think everybody has a role to play in that. And I will leave you, there's in my book, I actually have 25 easy things that you can do to be involved with that. This is an interesting one here. When you talk about electric versus gasoline, If you were to go 100 miles, it would typically a Nissan Leaf would cost you about $2.40. With a gasoline engine, that same trip will cost you $12 if gas is $3 a gallon. One other major point here is you'll find people who say, yeah, but you have to get electric to charge the car. So you have to use coal or some way to make that electric. With renewables, there's an alternative to that, but let's just say that we're true. Even if that's true, what you can't dispute is the fact that from an efficiency standpoint of the engines, a gasoline engine, if you take in a fixed amount of energy to what it actually produces on the other end, is only about 25 to 30% efficient, from the energy it takes in to the energy it puts out. An electric motor is about 75 to 80%. That difference alone is a reason to move to electric vehicles. And that's part of the reason why the different manufacturers, auto manufacturers, are moving toward hybrids and electrics, because it's much more efficient from an energy usage standpoint. So that part, nobody's disputed, but it's something that most people, if they're a naysayer, they'll tell you that, that they both use electric. And, you have to use a coal to generate electric. That's not necessarily true, because like I say, you can use solar panels now. It's much cheaper to do that. But even if it were true, the efficiency is a big deal. All right, so we talked about recycling, composting. You probably know a little bit about that. I'm not going to go into these things, like water. You can have rain sensing, sprinkler systems, et cetera. There is one I want to point out, though. I'll go down to lawn care. I don't know if any of you have looked recently, but there's a lot of equipment out there now for lawn care that's in electric. I bought an electric trimmer myself instead of the gas one that I had when I wore out the other one, and I love that thing. I mean, it's quiet, it's powerful, does the job I need. All I have to do is put the battery back on charge when I get done, and next time I go out, it's ready to go. So there's a lot of good alternatives, and you got it for lawnmowers, you got it for snow blowers, believe it or not, et cetera, for electric motors already in today's market. This one, my dad kind of tipped me off on, so I'm kind of proud of it. I kind of like it. He didn't put the chart together, but I found the chart and proved his comment. If you try to generate 1,600 lumens, which is the amount of how light is measured, for a 100-watt bulb, and you run that for the year, it'll cost you $12 for that light bulb. But if you buy an LED, it'll cost you $2.40 for that same light bulb, for the same output of light. So my message here is go change all your light bulbs if you have still got incandescent light bulbs out there, because there's a big energy savings from it. So, all right, so I'm pretty much done here. I'll stop with this. Sustainability starts with you. That's kind of my slogan. And I'll take some questions, and then if there's none, then we'll do a couple of last-minute stories. Sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking about electric vehicles. In the Prius, it recharges itself while you're going. Why couldn't an electric vehicle do that?
Well, there's recharging elements in all electric vehicles as well. In fact, if it weren't for that regenerative braking, there were times where I would have run out of power during this trip.
So there is.
Yeah, as you go downhill, you get regenerative braking. As you're braking, you put more energy back into the battery. And that's true for most all of them now. That's true. Just a story they're talking about running out of power. There were about 4 or 5 times where I literally thought I was running out of power. One of them was, the whole trip I didn't use my air conditioning. So I get to California, and it's 108 in Baker, California, and we're going to Barstow. It's 60 miles, it's not very far. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna use the air conditioning today. That sounded great. So we took off. And what I didn't realize till it was too late was it's all uphill to Barstow. And I was using the air conditioner, and it was hot, so it was using a lot of energy from that. Well, the combination of those two, I suddenly realized when I was, probably 20 or 30 miles from Barstow that I was almost out of power. And I thought I was going to have to push the car into the hotel, even though you can't push an electric car. But literally, I thought I was going to be out of power before I got to the hotel. It barely made it. And there were about 4 or 5 times that happened to me, where climbing up mountains, where it was the last, I thought I was on my last breath, my whole goal was to never use the electric generator that I had in the supply truck. And I made that goal. We never did use it. But the only reason I had it was in case I did run out of power, because when you stop an electric car, you have to go charge it right there where it's at, or flatbed it somewhere, because you can't just fill it up with gas like you do a gas engine. But fortunately, like I said, there were 4 or 5 times where I barely made it, but I did make it. Yes?
Yeah, I think your message is great, first of all.
Thank you.
And secondly, I'm wondering what the commitment is of the auto industry to these electric cars, because I know either in the 50s or 60s, General Motors killed the electric car.
Yeah, I think things are changing in a number of ways. You know, GM's now committed to going toward hybrids and electrics, as you probably know. No, they are.
They are.
And they've announced it, and in fact, that was a big reason why they supposedly closed the Lordstown plant in Ohio, which is near where I grew up, and where they made.
Did you say they're not?
No, they are.
They are committed.
They're committed to it.
Because they certainly weren't in the 50s or 60s.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that are changing right now, and that's actually a good topic. There's 3 things about when you use an electric car. I talked about planning. You have to know where you can get your power, et cetera. The keys right now for any electric vehicle owner is knowing the range of your vehicle, knowing where you can find your chargers or having one at home, et cetera, and how fast you can charge that car up. All of those things are getting tremendous amounts of money and resources into them right now, and things are rapidly changing. I told you my car only got about 90 miles on a charge. The newest Leaf out there is like 230. So in that 5 or 6 years span, it's doubled, more than doubled.
It's the battery that's changed.
That's the battery technology that's changing. At the same time, I charge with 220 volts almost all the way across the US. Well, there are superchargers now, and those are 440 volts. Most all the Nissan dealerships are getting those now. And instead of taking 3 to 4 hours to charge, you can actually charge them in 20 minutes. So what you can see is the infrastructure hasn't been there, but it's starting to happen. And so now the range and the battery, sorry, the range and then the way they'll be charged is getting better. They're now putting coolers onto the motors as they charge, because initially they had issues when they charged with 440 volts, you could actually damage the battery because it got so hot. So now they're putting coolers onto them so that doesn't happen. So now you'll have a way to charge in 20 minutes. And it's not unforeseeable that in the near future, you could maybe go along the highway for, whatever distance that they can go, 300 miles, 400 miles, when they get to that point, stop, charge up at a super charger for 20 or 30 minutes while you're having a bite to eat, going to the restroom, whatever, and then be on your road again. So you're getting to the point where it's now no longer just a commuter vehicle. Now it's getting to the point where people can plan actual trips and such. So, but it's because there's so much money going into the infrastructure to be there. Chargers is another good example. A lot of municipalities and states are putting money into more chargers around the area, and I know that's true here for Vermont. But also, you may not be aware, but Volkswagen, part of the settlement for the big Dieselgate thing they had, where they were doing bad emissions things on the Monroney labels and such, or passing the emissions, I should say, the emissions requirements, they have to put $2 billion in chargers across the country. So there's a lot of money going into charging stations as well. So now you have the charging stations, the battery range is getting much better, and you're able to charge much faster than you did before. And so those factors, as they come together, I mean, there's even technology where you could design a highway where it could potentially induction charge a vehicle as you're traveling along the road. Well, that's a whole different ballgame. I mean, now you're really talking about a whole different way of using electric. So my point is just that the infrastructure hasn't been there. You know, electric vehicles have actually been around since like the early 1900s.
I think it was actually before it was gas.
Yes, I think you're right.
I think that's the case.
And funny little story, I was in Calhoun, Georgia, and I walked into the restroom. On the wall, they have all these ads from all over the, you know, just, I don't know if they were out of the Sears catalog or what, but they were all over the bathroom. That was what the wallpaper was. Well, I'm looking up, and here's a little ad for an electric car from 1910.
That's right.
While I'm driving through in 2013, my electric car. I mean, it's just ironic. And I took a picture of it, it's in the book. But it's just kind of interesting that, you know, that technology has been around for a long time. It's just that never the infrastructure has been there to support it.
So the car companies are seeing the demand from the public?
Yeah, I think well, it's kind of a, you know, the chicken and the egg, who leads? And I think what you're seeing is that manufacturers are heading in that direction to commitment to it. I mean, Infiniti announced they were going to be all electric, so is Volvo, so is several of the manufacturers, either hybrid and or electric. So it's happening. It's just, you know, it's to be a gradual thing, especially as the infrastructure builds. Yes, sorry, you had a question? No, sorry. Yes?
Does cold weather reduce your range?
Good question. I had one of the folks, a couple people from Vermont talk about that. One of the things that they were concerned about was cranking power in cold. And I was told that was never an issue. A guy had an electric vehicle, I think it was a Chevy Bolt. I think that's what it was. But anyway, he said that he had an outdoor, you know, he didn't have a garage, and he never once had any problem in Vermont weather last year with cold. So from a cranking standpoint, he said it did reduce some of his range, but apparently it wasn't a huge issue for him. So he wasn't at all concerned about it.
What about waiting in line at a charging station? Does that happen?
Yeah, there's a couple of cases. In fact, one of the, I was in just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I had basically run out of power, and I had to go up a mountain to where there was a cave, and that's where the charging station was. So I drive up this mountain, I'm out of power basically, and I get to the parking lot, and the parking lot's full because I think it was a Saturday, it was a busy day. And right where the parking, right where the electric charger was a black Chevy, I think it was Tahoe, sitting there in that parking station, that charging parking lot space. And so we weren't very happy about that. And that happens to electric vehicle owners, and unfortunately, people that just don't care. I was able to pull the car up. I mean, literally, it was almost touching his bumper. That's the only way that I got the cord to reach far enough to charge up the car. And after we'd done charging, we sat there with the documentary crew for like an hour waiting for that owner to come back. But he never did, unfortunately. So we moved on. We had an engagement that night we had to get to. But we were hoping he would come back and have him answer some questions as to why he thought it was okay to park in the electric vehicles. It could have been that I couldn't have charged it at all, and that would have been a big problem for me. And so, to your point, it can happen. But that's, again, part of the infrastructure. If you're a Nissan owner, you know where to go to every Nissan dealer. You can recharge there if you need to. But a lot of the municipalities, that's what they've done. They put them in front of libraries, or they put them in front of state buildings. They put them in parks, whatever. Or shopping plazas are big place for charging stations now. Almost all of them have them now. So, but is it possible that you could have to wait? Yeah. Most people, I think, are pretty good. If you're an electric vehicle owner, you, I think, don't want to let it sit there all day. If there's some offenders, the offenders I've heard about, people that are working in corporate office buildings where somebody comes in, they charge there all day because they don't want to go out move their car, but there may be other people who need it. So that is one of the downsides you can't have. Yes?
So the little old lady story.
What's going on there?
Okay. I told you about Brinkley, Arkansas. I think I can. That was what I was telling you about, thinking that I was going to run out of power multiple times. There were many days or 4 or 5 times where I was literally sitting in the car. I think I can. Cambria, California was the one hole I couldn't figure out where I could get power. It is above San Luis Obispo, and it is on the Pacific Coast Highway between San Luis Obispo and Carmel. If you've ever taken that drive, you know it's a gorgeous view. It's one of the most beautiful in the country. And the group wanted to take that for their documentary, et cetera. And I said, well, that's great, except there's no power along this. And we have to go uphill to Big Sur State Park for our campground. So this is not a good combination for me. So I searched all around trying to find some power as close to the bottom of the hill, because once you get from Cambria, which is a podunk little town, to get up to Big Sur, there's nothing in between. I mean, nothing. So I was searching everywhere in Cambria to find power. I couldn't figure out how I could access power. So I talked to Susan. She put out a word to the internet for electric vehicle owners, and we got one response. That guy had just retired as a lawyer from San Francisco, and he retired in Cambria, California. And he had just bought a Nissan Leaf and installed a portable charger in his garage or deck area. So he says, yeah, come on down. We'll charge up. So that's what we did. The motorcycle and I drove over there, and we hooked up to his portable charger, and we went and had lunch and had a good time with him. Came back and filled up, and that was one of the days where I barely made it. Had the campground been any further, I wouldn't have made it. So that charge was critical. And it just so happened that guy was listening and had just gotten a Leaf, et cetera, and so it worked out. All right, stealing from the little old lady. Grand Canyon National Park. We come into the park and had a little ruckus internally, because I found out just that night that we were going to be camping. Okay, well, that's fine. Except that the campground that they had selected was a non-utility campground, meaning there was no power in the campground. I said, well, that's great. So where am I going to charge up the car, to be able to drive the next day? He said, we don't know. So they called. We had a third party that was helping us with PR, and they called the national park. Turns out the Grand Canyon has a sustainability organization, and it's actually a very strong one. In fact, they have sustainability plans for recycling everything from paper to mule dung. If you know anything about their trips down into the canyon, they use mules. Well, they require that the mule dung be recycled. And in fact, they require all of their concessionaires to annually provide them with a sustainability plan every year. So it was great to listen to their story, and we were glad to be a part of it. But meanwhile, they had told me, go over there, so if you need power, go over to the concessionaire campground and just plug into one of the outlets over there. So I said, okay. So we took the car over there, and the supply truck followed me, and I went ahead and picked out a campsite, plugged in, and I got back to the utility truck, took off. We went back there and listened to their guy from sustainability group, and spent time over there, took pictures, et cetera. So about, probably 2.5 hours later, we come back. So we're pulling into the campground, and as we're pulling up near my car, I see this little figure scurrying away from my car into the campsite next door. I said, that's pretty weird. What the heck were they doing? So I said, you guys hold on here. Let's find out what's going on. So I walk up to the car, and I go to make sure the car is fully charged, and there's nothing. I said, well, why isn't the car charged? So I go over there. Somebody's unplugged my outlet plug. And I said, what the heck, why would somebody unplug my car? And about this time, this little old lady, hunchback, comes out from the campsite next door, and she's wants to know why we're there and such. At the same time, there's this guy, had to be 6'2", probably 300 pounds. He comes down from the trailer just above there. It's obviously her buddy and guard. He comes down and he starts giving me the third degree. He wants to know why we're there. Who told us we could be there? How much power are you trying to use from this guy? It's like, what do you guys care? Then the forest, or not the forest, but the National Park Rangers showed up. They had called the National Park Rangers on us. So then we had to proceed to tell them why we were there and who had told us we could do it, and provide documentation not only on my driver's license, but also how I had this car, because it wasn't registered to me, and how I had had access to the car, and then tell them who had told us we could get into this campsite, et cetera. And we're trying to explain this between me and one of the motorcycle riders, to explain, hey, this is not a big deal. I said, why is anybody concerned about this? Well, the little old lady supposedly had that campsite before, and she moved to the next one over. And she'd come out there, and she'd seen the little powered wheel going round and round really fast. And she thought she was going to get charged for that, so she unplugged my car. So he said, well, even if that's true and we were getting charged for it, I said, we'll pay you for it. I said, it's not going to be any more than $4 or $5 to charge the car, So then she was like, nah, that can't be, And we had to explain to not only her, but to this big dude that I swear was on Jerry Springer, and then the park rangers to, that, hey, there's no cost to this. We'll give you the $5. So finally it blew over, and to top it off, she wouldn't even take the $5 that I offered her for the power, because she felt guilty then. And I had to sit there for another 3 hours to have my car charged, and she kept coming out because she felt guilty and wanted, talking to me about it, saying she was sorry, et cetera, but she never took the $5. So anyway, that's the little old lady story. I almost got arrested for stealing $5 worth of electricity. So, last story is about mean dogs. So I told you, remember that little shanty that I told you was on the Oklahoma-Texas border? It was a little bar, basically, in a souvenir place.
The one with the 2 red gas pumps?
No.
Okay.
You wouldn't recognize it anyways. It doesn't really matter. It's just a little tiny building. Well, we had stopped there and got something to drink, whatever, and the documentary crew was there with us. And so we come out and we go to, Rachel's riding with me, and we're going to take off on the road to finish our trip for the day. Well, as we come out and start to pull out with the car, there's this pack of dogs that looks like they're 90% coyote. And they start making all kinds of noise and start following the car, running right up beside us and chasing us. And so I get up to 30 miles an hour, and they're still chugging along beside me. Well, along about this time, I get a phone call. It's a documentary crew. They said, hey, that's pretty cool. Do that again. I said, what? So I stop the car. I back up, go all the way back to the state line there again. And we're ready. They're ready to film. So I start waving out the window, halfway, sticking my head out the window to get their attention, and starting to pull forward a little bit. And, well, the dogs didn't follow me this time. They're just sitting there. So we finally, I'm trying to get them engaged, and I'm telling Rachel, she's out there, she's motioning, trying to get them, yelling at them, whistling, whatever. And we start forward again. Well, about 3 of them started following. I said, okay, I think we got them, And I start accelerating. I'm getting them, probably 30, 35 mile an hour. And I said, hey, they're staying with us this time. And I look over, and the door is wide open, and Rachel's not even there. She had gotten out of the car, and I didn't know it. And so I slammed on the brakes, and I'm looking in the mirror because I'm dreading she's been attacked by these dogs. And I look back there, and I just burst out laughing. They caught it actually in the audio, because she was standing in the middle of the road, and these dogs are ringed around her like little students, waiting for her to teach the next lesson. It was so funny. But I thought she was going to get attacked by him. I was really dreading. I backed up to her. She got in the car. She was white as a ghost. And we left again. But it was one of the funniest but scariest moments of our whole trip. So that's the story about the mean dogs. So anyway, with that, any other questions? Or
Is there a particular electric car that really you see as the top, the best car?
You know, everybody's coming out with them right now. I mean, there's even, I know Volvo's even got an all-electric SUV that's coming out as well. So everybody's going to be coming out with them. I think, you know, the key things are just to look at what the range of the vehicle is and how fast the car can be charged. Those are two things that.
There's no real leader in the manufacturer.
Not yet. Not yet. I mean, the Nissan Leaf has been the leader from a production standpoint. They were the first production car of volume. But other manufacturers have kind of caught up to them, Chevy Bolt being one of them. And, you know, Tesla's on their, you know, their own deal. If you could afford a $90,000 car, I mean, there's a lot of great advantages because it has a lot bigger range. Now, their newer model, I don't know so much about it. I know that, you know, if their quality is there, because they've had to go through a whole learning experience about fit and finish for production, for volume. Everything in their old cars was built one at a time, basically. Now they're into actually doing volume production. They've had to learn from that. But if that's there and their batteries are there, if they've got that kind of range, that's certainly advantageous. I don't know where all their stations are. The advantage to having a non-Tesla would be that there's going to be probably a lot more stations for them to fill up. But if you're going from a major city to a major city, you know, Tesla would certainly be very viable as well. So to me, nothing really has jumped out yet as being a leader there. But I think part of it you have to look at, if you're thinking about an electric car, is knowing how you're going to use it. It's a great car for a commuter vehicle. I mean, if you're not going to be going long distances, it'll most likely do the job for you. And those that, you know, have it here in Vermont, you know, love their car because there's no maintenance to them, you know, other than, you know, tires and brakes. You know, they do well even in the snow and that because of the weight of the batteries and such. So, you know, I think this SUV that Volvo has, I know, is also all-wheel drive. I don't know if there's other all-wheel drive vehicles or not. That's probably something of interest to you as well. You know, front-wheel drive works pretty well, but in your mountain areas that you have, you might want to have an all-wheel drive. So, like I say, they're all coming out with vehicles to it, and the hybrids are not a bad alternative, really, if you want to consider something that's partly gas. So that's the best I have right now.
Yeah. It's interesting that the Nobel Prize was given to chemists that they revolutionized the battery.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, good for them.
1990s.
Yeah, the battery technology is growing rapidly, just like, you know, the batteries that they use for cell phones, et cetera. And I liken that to when people want to know, well, what's it like? You know, you remember what the cell phones were like just 20 years ago. Well, the same technology growth is happening now in electric vehicles as well. It's going to be fast. It may not be as fun or as fast as maybe we want it to be, but it's coming relatively fast. So, and with that much money being poured into it, the infrastructure will build pretty rapidly. Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too long for you, but hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And thank you. And if